Welcome to Inside Economics. I'm Mark Sandy, the chief economist of Moody's Analytics, and I'm joined by a few folks, my co-hosts, obviously, and colleagues, Ryan Sweet. Ryan, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Mark?
I'm tired, Ryan. Feels like it's only, 9:30, and it feels like I've been up for 5 hours. Everything is behind. I'm not sure what to make of all that.
It's busy.
It's
It's
busy.
crazy now.
It's crazy busy. And we got Cris. Cris is the deputy chief economist. How are you, Cris?
Doing well, Mark. How are you?
I,
You're
Chris,
tired.
I'm tired, man. I'm tired.
I thought
You
it was
sound
just
tired
me.
too. You're not as sharp as you generally are.
That's
feels
right.
like.
I need another coffee here, but
Yeah, and I had 20 ounces of my Wawa coffee, which is atypical. Usually it's 16, 20. Maybe that's
you're
the
off the
problem.
hazelnut though, right?
Actually not.
Oh,
I had hazelnut today.
well, that
I was thinking about pumpkin spice. I contemplated it for, a few seconds, but couldn't pull the trigger.
It's too early for pumpkin spice. You gotta wait till October.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's still kind of summerish out, although
Oh,
it's supposed to change.
first day of autumn, right?
Oh, true. Yeah, exactly. We're taping this on September 21st, so when is autumn? It's like tomorrow or something, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And we got Dan White. Dan, our colleague Dan, you got to say something.
I do. I'll just say something.
Okay.
Mark, I don't get to listen to these every week like everybody else does. Everybody should, right? But I listened to the one with Doug the other day because he's one of my favorites. Have
Yeah.
you really never had a Chicago hot dog? Is that possible?
I have never had no. I
How
didn't
is
even know
that
they
even
were a
possible?
thing. I didn't even know they were a thing. Really?
Ryan, you and Chris didn't give him nearly as hard a time on that as you should have. Like, that's ridiculous.
Well, we beat them up a lot over Guns N' Roses, so had to take it easy on them on the
That
hot dog.
I'm
I
going to
love.
stop listening to it because every time I listen to it, I get Guns N' Roses or the hot dog one, and I'm like, I don't know if I can listen
I
to
tell
it.
you what, we're all going to go to Chicago and we're going to have a hot dog while listening to Guns N' Roses. That's
The Red
definitely
Hots,
on the
yes.
bucket list.
In.
And where
I'm
are we
in.
doing this? I mean, I assume we're going to go to like the Cubs game or something. Watch that. No, is that where you get the hot dog?
Anywhere. You just get
Go
off the
anywhere.
airplane and they're right there near the airport.
What? Wait, is that true? I mean, what have I been missing this all my life? What are you guys
They're
talking?
all
Chris,
over.
did you know they're all over? They're all over. All right. All right, I didn't know that. Well, Dan is manages our state and local government practice, and actually government practice generally, federal government, state and local, and does a fabulous job at that. And you were on the podcast early on, about a year ago, so it's good to have you back
I
on.
was, yeah, back when you guys were just getting started, but now you guys are a big deal. Every time I talk to a client, they tell me how much they love the podcast. I was just
It,
on with some folks in Utah yesterday. They were just raving about it.
they listen to us in Utah. Cool.
Yeah, Maddie from Utah listens to you every week. So this will be a test. Maddie, if I get an email from you, I'll know you actually listen to each one.
Great. Well, that's good to hear. Yeah, we are having a lot of fun with this, and we also have another guest, Bill Glasgall. Bill, how are you?
I'm just great.
Oh, I thought you were
And
going to say
what,
I'm peachy. You were going to say I'm
well,
peachy?
no,
No?
I'm just fantastic, I think is the word.
Fantastic.
And what I want to know right off the bat before
Yeah.
we get around to talking about serious stuff is since the start of the year, since January 1st, how much is the price of a 20-ounce Wawa hazelnut coffee and a Chicago hot dog gone up? And
Ooh,
if you guys don't have the answer, we need it.
that actually is a reasonably good question. I don't know the answer. You know why? Because it doesn't matter, Bill. It could be, it could go up 300%. I'm still buying that Wawa coffee. I'm
That's right, but I want
totally
to see.
price inelastic.
I want to see, the Economist has the Big Mac index. I want to see the Moody's Economics, Wawa Coffee Index, and the Chicago Hot Dog Index
Okay,
very soon.
yeah, we can work on that. We can work on that. And did you know about the Chicago hot dog thing? I mean,
Of course. Of course, my mother came from Chicago. Of course, I know about Chicago hot dogs. You're in
Yeah, where have I
Pennsylvania.
been? I don't
Where
know.
have
I
you
didn't know
been?
about Guns N' Roses either until recently. So
You guys don't even know about the difference between pork roll and Taylor ham,
well, that's
which is
definitely
which
true.
which is no difference at all, except where you live in Jersey.
I'm a little nervous about this interview, I must admit. You know way too much stuff. You know way too much stuff. But Bill, it's great to have you, and I've gotten to know you during the pandemic, really, because you've been teaming up with Susan Wachter at Penn at Wharton, and putting on these. Are they webinars? What would you call them?
They're special
Convenience?
briefings,
So
and
special briefings.
it's a monthly webinar series, and we've had Dan on, we've had you, Mark, on, and people from the Moody's ratings side and S&P and all over the place. And the special briefing podcast is coming out right about the same time this podcast is going to appear. So we'd love to have you and your listeners join us either in the monthly webcasts or in the podcast version.
Cool. And this is part of you're the executive director at the Volcker Alliance, or are you managing the Volcker Alliance?
I'm the senior director for public finance at the Volcker Alliance, and also a fellow like you at Penn IUR.
Oh, that's right. I didn't. That's how Susan kind of fits into
Indeed.
all this. I got it. And can you tell us a little bit about your history? How did you land at, all these years at the Volcker Alliance, and a little bit about the Volcker Alliance too? I just for the listener to get a sense of that.
Sure. Well, the Volcker Alliance was set up in 2013 by Paul Volcker, the late Fed chairman, and Jay Powell's mentor, really. Refers to him all the time. And Paul was a long-time public servant. His father was a public servant, and he really wanted to improve the efficiency and the knowledge, the effectiveness of the public service. Where I came along is I learned about municipal finance mostly through my time at Bloomberg, running state and local coverage. I'm a longtime economic and financial journalist at various places, including Business Week, Bloomberg, S&P, and Dick Ravitch, the former lieutenant governor, was Paul's suite mate, and wanted to continue a program he had started about state and local budgeting. I took it over, and we launched the Truth and Integrity in State Budgeting scorecards, report cards that came out every year through 2019, looking at how sustainable in a fiscal sense and how transparent state budgets are, where they could be improved. We've helped some states, including Utah and Idaho, New Jersey, even improve some of their budget effectiveness and budget transparency. And when the pandemic came along, we decided everything is one-time funds now. It's kind of hard to give out grades when there's so much tumult in the system. So we're doing issue papers, conferences for now, and we'll go back to doing to grading the budgets now that things are hopefully returning to somewhat normal, and we can talk about what normal is. So that's it in a very short nutshell.
Great. Well, it's good to have you aboard. And I should have said this up top, but clearly we're here in this podcast focused on the state and local government sector, which it's interesting when you, as a macroeconomist. We spend a boatload of time trying to understand what the consumer is going to do and what businesses are going to do, and trade and inventories, federal government, but we generally kind of don't pay much attention to state and local government. And it's a pretty big piece of the pie, isn't it, Ryan? How do you, or Dan, do you guys have any sense of, I can't quite remember in the data, what percent of GDP is state and local government expenditures? Do you know?
I do.
Oh, you do? Okay. What is that?
It's close to 20%, I think, right?
Yeah, it's
no.
Depending on, yes, it is. It's close to 20%.
No.
State and local
government is
government,
not.
State and local government.
Okay.
Not. We're not talking about state GDP, but state and local government counts for about $3 trillion in change a year.
Oh yeah, but that's not GDP. That's
total
expenditures.
That's the total expenditure.
Yeah.
GDP.
But in terms of
it's I think it's closer to 16%. It's about 1/6 of the economy usually when you look at it.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you look at
that's
it,
even more surprising to me. Right?
If you look at it another way, it's an issue that we're exploring right now at the Volcker Alliance with some partners. The federal government, Congress, puts about $1 trillion a year, $900 billion a year, roughly, into states, counties, cities, school districts, and the like in grants and also tax exemptions, tax credits, and whatnot. So that's something that's not very well studied and certainly not very well regulated. Every program funded by the feds is highly regulated and highly structured. The big picture, Congress doesn't pay a heck of a lot of attention to, nor to the fact that the $4 trillion municipal market, which is the principal infrastructure funding facility for the whole country, is essentially unregulated and has been since 1975.
Yeah, can you, Ryan? You got the computer screen up, don't you?
Yeah.
Do you know what percent of GDP is state and local government? Is it
So
16?
I just took an average over the last few years. It's 17%.
It is 17.
There we are.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Sorry, Dan. I just had to I had to check it because
That's my one statistic for the day. There you go. I win.
and that goes to my point. How surprising that is, right? I mean, that's a big deal. Like business investment is, I think it's less than that, isn't it? If I look at total business fixed investment, Ryan, can you look at that?
Yeah, give me a
What
minute.
is? Yeah, I'll give you a second to go look at that. I think actually state and local is probably bigger than fixed investment. Okay, here maybe we can start the conversation. So the point. It's a big part of the economy. We tend not to really, at least macroeconomists tend. I know you guys do, but macroeconomists don't really spend a lot of time or focus on that, which is probably a huge mistake.
We take care of it so you don't have to, Mark.
Oh, I appreciate that. I appreciate it. We need,
Gotcha.
and that's why you're so key to our thinking about this. So maybe we can begin the conversation around just kind of the financial health of state and local governments broadly. And Bill, if you don't mind, let me throw that to Dan first, and then I'll turn it back to you. Dan, how would you characterize the current finances of state and local governments generally?
It's funny you should ask, because Emily Mandel, who's taking over a lot of our state and local government work and is fantastic, is actually finalizing our stress tests right now, the stress tests that we do every year. And what we're finding is that states have never been in better shape financially than they are right now. They've never been better prepared for a recession. The stress tests are going to find that about 39 states can handle a recession without really having to raise taxes or cut spending right now. And that is just orders of magnitude higher than we normally see in these kind of instances.
Bill, would you concur with that? Is that kind of, I mean, that was pretty definitive, I thought. Dan saying they're in great financial shape. Is that?
Oh, I
consistent?
agree. I'd put a couple asterisks next
Yeah.
to it because I like to always see. My journalistic training says, see the other side of the moon too, and right, state rainy day funds are close to a record high, especially in terms of spending. States went into COVID in really, really good shape. In a way, not surprising, because you had the longest economic recovery since 1857. States finally cured a lot of their worst excesses in terms of covering ongoing budget needs with one-time expenses. So they built up their rainy day funds. So when the bottom fell out of the economy briefly, states were better off than you'd expect. Then states, cities, counties, all got huge infusions, not just $350 billion in direct budget money, but all of the COVID aid, plus all of the aid to individuals that ended up in increased spending and increased savings and generated more sales and income taxes. So states are cooking now.
So, in terms of the health of state and local government finances, you both, with, the obvious caveats and asterisks, that it's about as good as it's ever been in the data that you've observed. Is that fair to say?
In the data, you can't find data that's better than this. So.
Right.
But we've only really got good data back to the mid 1980s or so on a lot of this stuff. So.
And when you say that, that goes to the strength of the revenue growth, the tax revenue growth, and it goes to you observe rainy day funds. So the rainy day funds, these are cash accounts that state and local governments have set up for a rainy day, and
Yep.
they all are full at this point.
They're full, but to Bill's point, they're full from before the pandemic. So states went
Oh, they
into
were.
the
Oh, okay.
pandemic. They went into the pandemic in better shape than they've ever been. And if you couple that with the economic growth we saw at the outset and all of that federal money that flowed in, both to states directly and through the rest of the economy and then ended up in tax revenue, that really gave them, a huge advantage going into whatever period of economic. I'm sure we can debate that for hours, but whatever the economy looks like over the next 2 years, they're about as prepared for it as they've ever been.
Okay. Hey, Bill, do you know, are there any states, I mean, because some states are better managed than others from a fiscal perspective. I mean, I think the poster child for troubled fiscal management is like Illinois, would be kind of a poster child. Is every state, including in Illinois, in a good financial situation right now? Or are there still shades of differences here?
I think shades of differences would be
Okay.
correct. In the immediate term, yes, every state is in good fiscal shape, and I know what you're dealing with states here. We could take a slight detour if you'd like in a moment about New York City, but you still have overhanging this substantial pension underfunding in many states, red and blue. Some of the states have been very, very responsible in putting extra money to pay down their pension debt. Connecticut is a great example. Illinois, even. So Kansas, Illinois, the usual suspects. New Jersey, Pennsylvania, California. These are states with big pension debts and debts for what's called OPEB, which is retiree health care. Those run into the many trillions of dollars. They'll probably be resolved over time, but they're still there. Infrastructure is another big if. A lot of maybe $1 trillion in deferred maintenance. That's sort of on the books, not really. It's not a well understood or well reported liability. So there are issues.
Right. Okay. And we're going to come back to those, but at the current point in time, Dan, any states or localities that kind of stand out as still troubled, despite all the good stuff that's happening?
Yeah, well, it's difficult. There's shades of gray, but the usual suspects are still not in great shape. So
Okay.
Illinois, we mentioned earlier. The one that is a big change, and you'll see this in the stress test when it comes out, is Alaska. They're usually number one in terms of preparedness, but they've blown through a lot of their reserves in the last 10 years or so, and they've run out of reserves. They really don't have any left. And so there's it's really a handful of states that would have to make any kind of extraordinary fiscal action if we had a recession, but they're still out there.
Got it. Okay.
And Alaska is an odd duck for many reasons. It lives on oil revenue and government funding. It has a $60 billion permanent fund. It's reserved for the day when oil runs out. That has helped feed the rainy day fund, which has been used to balance the budget for time immemorial. So Alaska's budget lives on a kind of a knife edge, good times and bad.
Okay. And Dan, you mentioned these stress tests a couple times. Do you just want to quickly explain what that is to the listener?
Sure. Yeah, it's something we've been doing on and off since about 2014. And it kind of takes a page out of what Cris and Ryan and you have done a lot with the banks, which is stress testing their budget. So we take alternative economic scenarios and we run them through our revenue forecast and our Medicaid forecast because it's a mandatory spending item. When we go into a recession, increased spending on Medicaid is almost as important as losing tax revenue because they've got to make up for that money somehow. So we run through those and we see what the fiscal shock would be for those states. And then we look at how prepared they are for that fiscal shock. And what that tells us is who are the states that are going to have to raise taxes a whole bunch and who's going to have to cut spending in the middle of a recession, because that's the worst time. You go back to your macro one-on-one, the last thing you want to do during a recession is raise taxes or cut government spending. And during the Great Recession, that's what a lot of states had to do. And it's one of the reasons why the Great Recession was followed by the not so great recovery. It took states in particular more than 10 years to recover all the jobs that they lost during the Great Recession.
Yeah. Hey, Ryan, so back to you. Did you pull up the business investment as a share of GDP?
I did. So as a share of nominal GDP, it's 18%.
Oh, a share of nominal GDP. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So it's about the same, roughly the same
Roughly the
as
same.
state, which is just, I wouldn't have said that. I should know that off the, but would you have said that, Ryan?
No, I was surprised.
Yeah, I was surprised.
The one contribution that'll be interesting to watch to that point is not just the GDP, but the employment number. If you look
Yeah.
at the overall employment, it has been, as a share of total, it has been falling significantly in the last 20 years. If you look at the one number that we just called out in our piece that we did last week is if you look at state government non-education, so you take the schools, the universities out of it, they're at the lowest level of employment they've been since 1993 in an absolute number. So in 1993, we had more state government employees outside of colleges than we have today.
Well, I think the pandemic did a number on K through 12, right? I mean, getting
right. So excluding K through 12, that's just state government.
Oh,
so these
I
are,
see.
Your
state
police
government.
And, yeah, just state government.
I see. Interesting.
Well, state governments are very gun shy, and they're actually state and local governments are all approaching a huge watershed because the workforce is getting older.
Yeah.
COVID has accelerated the retirements, and what are they going to do? Will they continue to do what the federal government has done and just outsource a lot of jobs to nonprofits, consulting firms? You especially see this in the Medicaid arena and the technology arena, and that may be the course. So rather than take on those huge pension liabilities and OPEB liabilities, make it somebody else's problem.
Hey,
I think that's a big opportunity, though, Bill. Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No,
that's a big opportunity because what states are doing is now that they've got all this money from the federal government, the knock against that bill has been for the longest time, we can't do the technology investment. We can't bring in the outsourcers because we just don't have the cash,
right?
Especially one-time cash. Now they've got all kinds of one-time cash. And it's a really great opportunity for them to change those processes and make them a lot more efficient than they've ever been.
Turning back to the link between state and local government and the broader economy, macro economy, and this is a narrative I have in my mind, and I don't know if this is right or wrong, but historically, during recessions and on the backside of recessions, early recovery, state and local governments are kind of retrenching. They're pulling back. They're not adding to economic growth. In fact, obviously in the wake of the financial crisis, they were a big drag on economic growth, coming out of that recession for the first part of that recovery. It was really only until the end of that long expansion that they started to really kick into gear in terms of contributing to economic growth. In the current environment, it doesn't feel like they're adding to growth to any significant degree, which I'm curious about why, given their financial situation. But they're not. I guess they're not subtracting from economic growth. Is that narrative right? Roughly right? Do I have that right?
Yeah, I mean, if it's the spending side, they're contributing a lot more on the spending side than the employment side. But on the spending side, their nominal numbers are really being squeezed by inflation. Their real impact has been almost zero, but their nominal numbers are up like 7 or 8%.
That's a really, really important point. State budgets for fiscal 23, according to NASBO, it's the state budget officers. So they have state budgets for 23 up about 1% and a fraction in nominal terms. So in real terms, state spending is really going backwards, if I do my arithmetic right. And where you see strong revenue collections in real terms, it's in sales taxes, because it's the sales taxes rise along with the goods prices. Income taxes are not going to be following inflation up.
So despite these extraordinarily good financial conditions, state and local governments are not adding to economic growth, and sounds like maybe even a drag. If nominal is low single digit, inflation is mid high single digit, then real is declining. How do you square that circle? Or maybe what we're not picking up here is the tax cutting that some of the state and local governments are doing, because I'm looking just at I'm looking at the kind of the expenditure side. They could also be helping the economy out if they're cutting tax, helping, I guess, depends on your prism, given the high inflation. But anything to add there? I mean, I'm a little confused by it. Why aren't we seeing more state and local government spending going on, at least in the data?
My anecdotal opinion is that they're being careful. They've learned some lessons from the recovery from the Great Recession. We've done a lot of survey work on how states are spending their $195 billion share of the state and local fiscal recovery fund. They've been pretty good, with a couple exceptions, on not using that 195 billion to prop up existing programs, continuing programs that will have no visible source of support when the money runs out in 2026. So they're using this money to fill holes where they can. The tax cut, a lot of there's about 32, 33 states that have done some kind of tax reduction move, rebates, credits, actual reductions. It's a lot of it is really focused on giving money back. So it's money they collected, and they're just they're handing it back to you.
Okay. So the good strong finances are the result of a few things. Just to summarize, to make sure I have it right. One is they kind of came into the pandemic in a pretty good spot, financially. Second, they have been cautious in kind of managing their finances, wanting to build those rainy days and obviously not spending a lot of it on a real basis. Third, they got a lot of support from the federal government. You've alluded to that, Bill, a few times. The American Rescue Plan that was passed in March of 21, I think it had $500 billion in total for state and local. A big chunk of that was for schools, like $150 billion were for K through 12, I believe, and then another $350 billion went basically checks cut to state and local governments. And they have through when 2026 to spend that or to use that money. Is that right?
Right. From that's right. 2026, and there's some other school aid that expires in 2025. It's very important for New York City. Yeah.
And then, of course, the economy's been strong broadly, and that's helped. And the stock market had been strong and now back in, which actually helps, at least temporarily, juice up personal income tax revenues in states with capital gains, because people taking capital gains on the high they're realizing the gains that they've accrued. So tax revenue is very strong, and then, of course, the inflation has been strong, so that adds to state and local government. That adds to sales taxes, and then until recently, house price is very strong, so that adds to property tax. So everything kind of sort of going in the right direction for state and local governments, and thus their current financial situation. Okay. All right. Well, let's turn to. So did I have that right? Did I get that right? You guys, Bill, Dan, did I miss anything? That feels about right. Okay. So what are they? We've talked about this a little bit, but what are they doing with all this cash, or what do they have planned? To do with all this, all these resources going forward? Are we going to see state and local governments kind of become more of a contributor to broader economic growth, more jobs, more GDP, more support to the economy? Bill, is that in train?
I don't see state and local employment as a big engine of growth. Maybe Dan will disagree with me. I think there's a lot of conservatism baked into the system here. It's just, everybody's complaining. We have open positions. There was a survey by the Associated General Contractors a few weeks ago, and every state they surveyed said, we don't have enough engineers, we don't have enough finance people, architects, ditch diggers, you name it. But they didn't have enough of these people before the pandemic either. So governments are making do with smaller workforces, or smaller workforces per dollar of output, if you will. And I don't see that changing. New York City was a bit of an outlier, especially under the previous administration, added about 10% to the workforce. New York City was really flush. Now the city's got a rainy day fund that would cover about half of the deficits that the Adams administration envisions over the next 3 years. So New York City's got some fiscal cliff issues when the federal money runs out. That may not be unique, but mass transit systems are going to have some big issues. New Jersey is investing quite heavily now in new train sets, station upgrades. They're actually putting money into capital. Not clear what's going to happen if there's a recession and no federal funds.
Right. Right. What, Dan? What do you think state and local governments are going to do with all this financial resource that they have right now? Are they going to be? Bill's making the case that they're going to remain cautious, and I guess one-time projects than standing up programs that require ongoing funding. Although that's happening too. Is that roughly your view on how this is playing out?
He's on the right track, but I think there's going to be a decent sized GDP hit from states as they spend this money, because it's got to go out the door. It has to go somewhere, but it's going to be all one time, and I think rightfully so, because the reason states are being so conservative is because this is one time money. They've seen what happens when you take one-time monies and put them into recurring programs. It's really, really ugly. It's a lot of problems. So they're putting it all into these one-time things. I think where the opportunities are, and I think hopefully this will help in the future, they're not going to find enough workers to fill all these jobs the way they used to Bill's point. So they've got to be investing in process improvements and in technological improvements, and in some cases bringing in outsourcers. I know Bill talked about that earlier, but you've seen the labor market that we're in, Mark, better than anybody. It's a really hard labor market to exist in right now. Imagine not being able to raise people's salaries, not being able to add positions, not being able to do all these things. There's a lot of handcuffs that are around government hiring managers, and they just can't operate in this dynamic of a labor market. They need some of those contractors to come in and be a little bit more dynamic with hiring and things, and that's really what they've got to do.
You said hit to GDP. Did you mean add to GDP?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It'd be a bump to GDP. There should
bump
be a bump
to GDP
from them spending. Yeah.
So you think because they have all this cash, they have to, especially the American Rescue Plan money, they've got to spend that or deploy it, tax cuts,
Right,
whatever, by 2026. So that's the next several years. Then that, as they deploy that, that will help support economic growth here. So the state and local governments, unlike coming out of the financial crisis when they were a headwind, they're going to be a tailwind to economic growth.
Yeah, and it could be a marginal tailwind to Bill's point, but there's still going to be a tailwind in terms of some of that investment, especially technological investment, things like that.
Yeah, and your broader other point is this is maybe a GDP thing. It's jobs are going to be a lot harder.
Jobs are going to take forever. I mean, it took twice as long in the Great Recession for them to come back, for state and local jobs to come back. And you use that same logic, it's going to be at least another 3 years before state and local government payrolls get anywhere near where they were before the pandemic.
You know, Bill, it used to be the case before Dan joined me, I would get invited to all of these, NASBO, NGA, all these functions, FTA. Now I don't get a call from any of them. They go right to Dan, which
they still love you, Mark.
Is that right?
That's what they tell me. They say, "Tell Mark we."
I need some love. I need some love. I get a call every once in a while.
But they like me because I think like a budget officer. I have correctly predicted 7 of the last 2 recessions, and that's exactly how they think, and that's how they love it. And they love it all.
That's the
You're
trick.
just too optimistic for them. Yeah.
Oh man. That you know what? I think that makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
In a way, it doesn't matter that you predicted 7 of the last 2 recessions. What matters is that you're doing stress tests, and what matters is the states that are doing stress tests and long-term budget scenarios. There's only we have a paper on this coming out, God willing, in a couple of months. There's about half the states don't look much beyond the end of their nose. They look at the fiscal year and then.
Yeah,
maybe
Bill,
1 year out.
Can I say, if you keep talking like that, you're not going to get invited to any of these things.
No. I'm very happy to criticize and to praise the states like Utah or Maryland.
Okay, there now he's sucking up. You see that? Now he's sucking up. He realized he went overboard.
Another shout out to Utah.
He went another shout out to. He wants to go to you.
They're my friends.
He wants to go to Park City or something.
Not bad.
I can feel it.
I'm just saying that
I'm just teasing you, Bill.
States and cities that can invest a little bit to take a long-term view, they're not going to hit it they're not going to hit it right on the nose. What they're going to do is look at possibilities. So what's our structural deficit? New York City does this, Maryland does a great job of this. What's our structural deficit going out 4 years? So then we can apply your and Dan's best case scenario, mid case scenario, worst case scenario, and look at what might happen to revenues. And that's really, really important. And not enough states do this and should.
Yeah, makes sense. I just want to end that conversation on the relationship between state and local governments and the economy and back to jobs. And I have been invited to a few events, and the one question I have been getting is, help me with my labor supply problem. What should I do? And I've been flummoxed by that question. But your answer, Dan, seemed to be labor saving technology, investment. I got to improve productivity. I've got to do more, provide these services with fewer people. Is that the answer?
This is a great economist answer, but it depends, right? It depends on what they're trying to fill. If they're trying to fill call center people to answer unemployment insurance stuff, that's outsource that. That's an easy one to outsource. But if it's economists in the state budget office, that's different. That you got to attract it. And where state and local governments are seeing, for the last 25 years go down, is that as all those pension issues have popped up, we've had to deal with not being able to offer as good benefits, the OPEB and the other post-employment benefits, and all that stuff that they used to use to attract people and keep them there for their whole careers. They're not as generous as they used to be, and so they need to come up with other tools to keep people in the workforce.
Yeah. Anything to add there, Bill, on the labor supply?
And that's difficult. If we have a recession, what's your odds as of this taping?
Well, hang on, Bill. You didn't ask me what was easy, and you just said, how do we fix it? It doesn't necessarily mean easy.
I fix it. I think it's going to be technology, higher salaries, higher compensation where need be, if they can afford it. And for the states that are cutting income taxes, going to a flat tax, cutting tax rates, they may be constraining their futures. They're doing great now, and they can give it back. I like the states that are cutting taxes with a trigger. So if revenue doesn't make a certain hurdle, then they won't do the next tax cut. So even some states like Indiana are being cautious about tax cuts. We want to make sure it's there.
Yeah, I want to come back to some of the challenges, longer term challenges the state and local governments face. But one other question I had was the infrastructure legislation passed at the federal level back last fall is going to provide a lot of funds for infrastructure projects, and that's starting to kick into gear, I think, starting up now, but really in 23 and then particularly in 24, 25. Does that complicate things for states? Does that supplement, or, how does that, or is there any kind of relationship at all between that legislation and what state and local governments are going to be doing?
I don't think it complicates it. Dan probably has the macro picture, right? It's of that $1 trillion, about half of the $1 trillion in the infrastructure bill is half of that was the highway bill, was spending that was already there, pretty much already planned and continuing. So you're talking about spreading $500 billion. It's a big number, but over 10 years.
Okay.
A lot of states and cities are complaining that that bridge that was going to cost me $200 million is now costing me $300 million. Yeah. It may be that this money won't go as far, but $50 billion a year in a $20 trillion economy. I'll let you do the math.
Got it.
And it'll be a marginal extra kick, a nice boost for jobs, a nice boost for the states, to be sure. But I don't think this is going to be an epical event.
Yeah. When the Congressional Budget Office, the federal budget keepers, kind of think about infrastructure spending at the federal level, they always make an assumption that state and local governments, because they're the ones that are kind of on the front lines of the infrastructure spending, actually pull back on the spending they would have done otherwise. So the net impact on infrastructure spending is reduced. Does that resonate in this case as well? I mean, is that going to happen here too, Dan? Do you think?
Yes, yeah, CBO has done some really good work on that historically, and they've probably got the best numbers out there on it. But to Bill's point, there's a lot of differentiation from one state. The regional impacts of this are going to be huge. The states who were ready, who had their, I hate to use that Great Recession shovel ready thing again, but the states who had everything ranked and prioritized, this is what, if we get money, we're going to spend on before, they got that money out the door fast and they got it allocated quickly. Yeah. They're not getting hit by inflation as much, but the ones who went, oh, here's an extra couple $100 million, what do we do with it? They're not going to see the same benefit.
Yeah. Okay. Let's turn to the challenges. And Bill, you mentioned, and Dan, you mentioned a few, and I want to get a sense. I'm going to list a couple, and maybe you can add to the list, and then you can tell me which you think is at the top of the list of concerns that we should focus on. We talked about the expiration of the American Rescue Plan money in 2026, and I think you characterized it as a cliff, a fiscal cliff. So I got all this cash, I got all this money, it's gone. So what happens on the other side of that? You mentioned the pensions. It's kind of been a perennial long-term issue, and then you've also mentioned the fact that some states are using the current environment to fund ongoing spending or tax cuts that aren't triggered in any way. They're kind of there, and what happens at the other end. Are there other things that should be on that list of longer term challenges, and what should be at the top of the list?
The problem that states are seeing is that state government budgets have started to look an awful lot like the federal budget, and not in a good way. So more of the state budgets goes to Medicaid and other social and benefit payments than ever has gone in the past. And the reason is that the inflation on those programs over the last 20, 30 years has gone at a much faster pace than tax revenues. And so they're supplanting from education or whatever else they used to spend that money on, and they're spending more of it on Medicaid. It's one of the reasons why they just can't afford to have as many employees as they used to do. That's the same problem that the federal government is seeing, and it's just slowly going to eat away more and more and more. And so they either have to get much more efficient at all those other services, or they've got to change Medicaid, and they can't change it. They've got to have the federal government change that for them.
I agree. Medicaid has been increasing very steadily in real terms for forever, since the 1970s, and taking up a bigger share of state spending. As our society ages, it's an ever bigger piece of the pie. There's a very interesting immediate question for Medicaid that maybe Dan knows more about than I do, is that the states are getting special COVID dispensation, even the states that didn't take expanded Medicaid support. So this is sort of from 6 months to 6 months to 6 months, declaring medical emergencies. At some point, either this special funding is going to end, or we're going to decide that COVID is a reality, and a lot of this special funding is really ongoing funding. I have no idea how this comes out, but that's a big budget concern for states right now.
How much money is that? The COVID funding? Do you know? How big a deal is that? The special.
I'm muted. I can't remember the last the last numbers. It's like between 50 and 75 billion a year.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
Oh, it is. Oh, okay. It's consequential.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the bigger consequence in the near-term fire drill that they're going to run into, Bill, is when that money does expire, and most people assume it's going to expire in the first quarter of next year when the COVID pandemic goes away, is that they're going to have to do redeterminations on all of the people who came onto Medicaid during the pandemic. One of the strings attached to that money, Mark, was that you couldn't kick anybody off of Medicaid during the pandemic for any reason. So even people who didn't qualify for Medicaid anymore had to stay on. So now they've got to go through mountains of paperwork and millions of people who joined Medicaid and figure out who still should be on Medicaid and who shouldn't. And they can't find the people to hire to do that. It's a huge workload, and they've got a certain amount of time they got to do it. And it's a big fire drill that they're going to be dealing with a lot lately.
Okay.
There's another wrinkle, non-Medicaid wrinkle, which is unemployment insurance. At the peak, states owed about $53 billion. Many states habitually underfund their unemployment insurance programs because they can always go to the Treasury and ask for a check. And during COVID, interest was accrued but suspended on those loans, so everything was fine. But there's several states now with some large balances outstanding. California had about $17 billion in loans outstanding. New York has about eight-ish, I believe. Nobody knows what New York is going to do, but I talked to one official in California who assumes that the state is going to raise taxes on employers to help pay this off. This is what New Jersey did last year and this year. State of Michigan, after the Great Recession, put a special assessment on employers and use that to borrow through the bond market to pay that off. So New York State's got an $8 billion mini fiscal cliff. That's a good share of the budget. California, $17 billion. It's not quite the same as the rainy day fund, but there are taxes going up even now.
Right. Okay. So to add to the list, the issues around Medicaid that have been they were long running, but exacerbated by the pandemic and the response to the pandemic, and unemployment insurance also. Related.
Yeah. See, Mark, this is why they like us, is because we're always full of sunshine and rainbows all the time.
Yeah. Well, no, that's what I want. I was asking: is there any other significant challenges? I'm sure there's things that we don't even know that will come up, but anything like that's on the radar screen right now that you would call out as a challenge, over the next few years?
I think union labor agreements that are coming up for renewal are a big deal. In some places like New York State, if unions don't come to an agreement, then the terms of the old contract remain in place. It's looking like unions are not gaining in real terms, so they're losing ground. But this is a large issue for New York City, with a workforce of authorized workforce of about 320,000 and tens of thousands of vacancies right now. That's where the city is saving a lot of money at the cost of reduced services.
Right. Okay. So just to sum up from a macroeconomic, my kind of prism, the macroeconomic perspective, the way I'm landing based on the conversation is, one, state and local government finances are good, about as good as they've ever been. Two, state and local governments are going to be a bit of a tailwind to the economy, over the course of the next several years. Not a tailwind that's blowing really hard, but certainly not a headwind like it has been historically coming out of recessions, which is a good thing. But three, there are some pretty significant challenges here, some of which were long in the making. Pension underfunding would be an example of that. Some exacerbated by the pandemic, the UI program, the Medicaid program, that would qualify, and the expiration of the American Rescue Plan. And so we've got some challenges, down the road here, but for the time being, for the next few years, we should get a bit of an economic tailwind from the state and local government. Is that fair? Is that a good characterization of the conversation, do you think?
I think so.
Bill, okay.
Yep.
Dan, okay, good. Cris and Ryan, you've been listening to the conversation. Where would we got a few more minutes left. Anything you'd want to push and press on and explore? Anything I missed that you'd like to ask Bill and Dan? I'll go to you, Cris, first.
Yeah, no, I think it was excellent summary of the current state and future states of the states. I guess I was a bit surprised or impressed by, if I'm reading correctly, that the states and local governments have gotten more efficient over time. At least that was one of the takeaways I took. And another one was that it sounds like we need a push in terms of, we talk about infrastructure investment. It seems like government infrastructure investment needs to occur as well to make this whole equation work. You mentioned technology, labor-saving technologies, outsourcing, right? So it seems like more generally that has to be a priority, not only for the states, but for the national government as well. Did I read that correctly? Or
Yeah, but to Bill's point, some of that improvement in efficiency is moving from the 18th century to the 19th century. It's not like they're moving from 2010 to 2015. There's
Now
still a
you may
lot of
not be
way to go.
invited back. I mean, they're going to ask me back after that comment.
Oh, they're going to be the
Jeez.
first ones to say that.
Yeah, right. Ryan, anything
get
you
the
want
Googles
to?
and the Apples in there as well to make some infrastructure investments? Is that what you're
They
saying?
would love it, I'm sure. But
Yeah.
especially at the local level, there's a lot of those kind of things that just can make things a lot easier for everybody. Because if you can't have more people, you've got to get more productive. There's no other way to do it.
Yeah.
And Ryan, anything you wanted to press on or ask or?
No, I mean, the only thing I would stress is that this tailwind it's a small tailwind. I mean, the most that state and local governments have added to GDP since 1980 is 0.6 of a percentage point. So,
Oh, really?
I was, in the discussion, I was wondering, I was like,
Yeah.
man, maybe my recession odds are too high, but no,
No,
this
it's
isn't gonna
marginal.
happen. Yeah.
But it always is. To Mark's point, coming out of a recession, they're always the government should be a tailwind because it's what was supporting the economy during the downturn. It should be.
Although they typically state and local governments, if correct me again, just so I have this right, they are a headwind generally. They are pro-cyclical. They're not counter-cyclical like the federal government. That's my
Yes, no, they should.
my
Yeah, they
sentiment.
should be a drag. They should.
Yeah.
I think we're getting our wins confused.
Yeah.
They should be
Okay.
a drag on growth after the.
Okay.
Should be a drag on growth after the recession. They should always be a drag on growth.
Stan is flipping all these phrases. Hit means good. Bump means bad. You've got to get him on the podcast more often so he gets.
I've been hitting the head a lot, Mark. You
gotta
give me some grace.
You got. Okay, I got it.
Got to watch
Got
out during the statistics game with Dan, right?
Oh, I
Gotta
know.
get the signs
Pluses
right.
and minuses. All right.
Yeah, the pluses and the minuses. Yeah, exactly. Hey, this was a great podcast, and really enjoyed the conversation. And Bill, I want to thank you for taking the time. And again, you've got the first edition of your podcast coming out on the Special Briefing podcast next Friday. Is that right?
God willing, on Apple, Google, Spotify, and all the same wonderful podcast platforms you're probably on too.
Okay. Well, I promise I'm going to tweet yours, you tweet mine, and we'll be good. Sound good? Deal?
Absolutely.
Okay. And we'll have you, hopefully you'll be willing to come back on at some point in the future. And Ryan strives to be 49% right. So if you could just do 50-51, you're golden. So just saying. Sorry, Ryan. I had to get that.
Right.
I have not ragged on you the entire podcast.
I know this was a first.
Yeah. Well, with that, we're going to call this a podcast, and I hope you enjoyed it. And we'll talk to you next week. Take care now.